myself in fierce battle with the entity called water. I would like for the entire world to be made of dust, under my domain naturally, and he would like it to be all waters. But in our quarrels, we manage an equilibrium. Water and earth, perfectly balanced, the wild untamed seas, the little bubbling brooks, and my mountains and valleys and all that entails. Sometimes some of us gain a little bit or lose a little bit. Ice will take some of it, or it will lose a bit of it in others. However, there was one year that I lost entirely and the world was consumed by it. It wasn't for a lack of trying, rather, I just gave up. It wasn't under my authority. I was told to, of course, and for my obedience and my loyal outstanding, I was given my dearest and most outstanding possession, the moon. I had always loved the moon. Its lonesome rays seemed to be my only friend, even back then. But now, it and I are locked in a beautiful relationship. I, the king of the moon, and the moon over me as I explore the forgotten bits of earth. A guy like me can't count on much, but the moon will be my dearest friend until I went to Silver Dollar City with my church group, and we all had a fun time. Though we didn't go all out like usual, as they had a new pay-for-ride policy. But after it was done, I was getting ready to leave when I noticed a storm hanging on the horizon. The air seemed to run cold as I stared at the dark clouds in the distance, but I still got on the road. I passed by the beautiful countryside, glowing in the evening sun, all too aware of the storm behind me. I got on the interstate eventually, dodging potholes left and right, on the ramp, and squealing on to the only lane open, when suddenly the sky opened and buckets of rain beat down on my car. I had been squinting into the sunset, but this storm blocked out and brought the world around me into darkness, more extreme than night. The interstate conditions didn't improve either. Potholes the size of bathtubs littered the road, and cones and concrete dividers were abundant. So I decided to get off at the next exit, wherever it might be. The road I pulled off on was overgrown and neglected. I eventually stumbled across the looming figure of a mall standing out of the storm, and eventually, after waiting in his parking lot for a while, I decided to get out and see what the inside of it looks like. I took the main entrance, which was beside the pharmacy, which as far as I could tell was the only business open inside. It was on my left as I entered, spilling out light into the inky blackness of the dark mallway. Rain hid nearby but unseen glass skylights like 1,000 hammers, and thunder rumbled all around. A flash of lightning came and lit up the sky, flooding the mall with light through the skylight. For only but a brief moment. Thunder boomed as I processed the image copied into my brain. The mall was completely empty except for the pharmacy, but a lot bigger than I had expected, with a top floor and an extremely long hallway with 3 more sunroofs. And delicate tendrils of rain came down through the ceiling, and there was a thin film of water further down the mallway. I went into the pharmacy. The rain was quieter there, but it was joined by an electric buzz. The place smelled like an old carpet, which I found comforting. I got a few odd snacks there and left. The rain having lightened, if only slightly. So, have you ever had a feeling like something bad was gonna happen?
Yeah, every time we start a video.
No, not like that. But I had a way I can prove it. Well, it doesn't have to be bad, but it's certainly ominous. So one pretty ordinary day, Troy and Miles came over to my house. I was having sort of a melancholic feeling as I went about my day, though I assumed that it was just on the looming storm that was bearing down on where I live. I could tell the two had something important to say, so I quickly joined them in my main room. It was about one of my childhood friends, Preston's house, long abandoned behind where I lived, as I half assumed that it would be. So, we set out on foot. The sky was overcast overhead, and the storm was drawing near. Thunder rolled all around us, and the first drops fell as we approached. Preston's house was overgrown then, and it had been abandoned for a long time. We hopped on the porch as a heavy downfall began, but the vicious wind blew the rain in around the roof. We huddled around the door and then filed inside as the rain beat on the dark house like a drum. Another quiet dripping was audible from somewhere deep inside. We headed straight for the basement, the rain sounds muffling when we entered. That was when they showed me. Under the sagging, creaking wooden stairs was a door that led to the future.
The future? I'm never making a sports bet with you again.
I have to plead the fifth on my recent luck in the sports betting market. But as we opened the door, we were terrified to see nothing behind it.
Serves you right. Your stupid door broke.
I certainly hope it did, because if it didn't, there's no future for us to look to.
Hey guys, I just thought I'd come in after this video and explain what was going on, because I don't think that it was too entirely obvious. I proceeded to do a terrible job explaining what was going on in that video so we're going to try that again. So what was going on is, in the world of Dustfall, I'm not Dust, really. Sometimes he represents me, but I also use other characters to represent me in the dreams. Basically whatever works best for the lore and such. I think I was Dust. I'm Dust most of the time. I was Fade in maybe one episode, Rot in a couple episodes maybe. Oh, and of course, Dust's kids frequently. And but I am a character in Dustfall. I'm a little background character, there I am. So this video in Dustfall would have come from that character, me in Dustfall. So if that clears anything up, then I guess I did a better job this time than I did last time, because the last time I tried this, it did not go all that well. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I also wanted to say we're doing uploads every single day of October. But I hope you all enjoyed this video, and God bless you all, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
I got a job working at a small pizzeria and arcade, just washing dishes, mostly on the night shift. I'd work late into the night, washing dishes and then sweeping and mopping the dish room and cleaning up this and that, and even a little bit of maintenance here and there. And I was there one night doing exactly that, much like many other nights, when I had to go into the walk-in cooler in the back of the store. The cooler always gave me a slightly weird feeling. It was dark and a little damaged, beaten up on the inside, so I stayed out of it most of the time. But my coworkers liked the place, having a big space to vape and smoke and occasionally even drink. And that night they were in there doing just that, unbothered by the slightly eerie space. I put some things off of the all-you-can-eat salad bar inside and then got out, feeling watched both by my coworkers and by something else. I didn't bother them as I slowly cleaned and prepared my space for the rest of the night, finding peace in the simple menial work. But eventually I did run out of things to do, and it was at that point when a man I didn't notice as one of my coworkers stepped out of the freezer and spoke to me. As he talked, the lights seemed to dim around me. He talked from the inside of the cooler, telling me how to clean it or some menial thing like that. But as he talked and the lights dimmed, the items on the shelves behind him slowly morphed into decapitated human heads and other body parts. The place was gaining a red glow, and him a glow himself, with these piercing eyes that hurt my head. I was growing agitated, and then suddenly, it stopped. The entire illusion was broken, or reestablished, and everything strange was gone. I hurried outside, clocking out quickly and retreating into the dark night air. Only one of my coworkers had survived. A nice guy and a hard worker with kind eyes and a mustache, but also the only other person to have not ventured into the walk-in that night. He came out just a little after me, and we stood outside, not really knowing what to do. It was technically a manager, though not the main one, and we didn't know who we should call.
Shortly after, they closed that location due to the incident. They said it was because they had no one to work there, but I knew the statement wasn't entirely true. My good friend Rot and I were going on a bit of a road trip, and in one of the side towns we passed through, we saw something interesting. It was a huge abandoned storage building, but that wouldn't have piqued my interest as much if I didn't see the extra windows and the slides poking out of it, as if it had a hotel and a water park inside, built off the empire of self-storage. We decided to explore the old structure, and we pulled over beside it, getting out in its shadow and walking up a brief hill into the parking garage. It was surprisingly easy to get in. From the parking garage there were stairs which led directly into the huge abandoned water park. We went through the old slides, which were now dry and empty, and explored the pools. Eventually, we decided to go up to the hotel that surrounded the place. The storage units were separate, but also didn't really pique our interest as much as the hotel, so we stuck to there. We got an odd feeling in it. It was dilapidated, more so than the park, and the whole place reeked of gang activity. And also, generally, the smell of mold was strong in there. People scuttled about in the darkness, like rats. And more than any of these, there just wasn't much to see, so we decided to leave. But take a different route than the way that we had come in.
That way we could see more of the place and not backtrack.
He found stairs in the hotel bit and took them down back to the parking garage. But there were people in there, and not the kind to scuttle away into the darkness. These ones had an air of importance about them. Self-importance. But that might be the most dangerous kind. They asked for our valuables, but before anything else could happen, sirens flooded in from the outside. The police were here. They had evidently seen Rot and I entering the space. And so, they all, like the rest, scuttled away, and Rot and I left peacefully. The place was big enough for us to avoid the police without a big chase. And we left the sad and depressed town, never to return.
Fade and I dropped Hope off at a daycare on the outskirts of town. By then, the rebellions had broken the news. They were all over the place. Children rising up against the older generations. But we didn't think about that when we dropped him off. He quickly rose through the ranks as he was there more than the other kids. What can I say, other than I forgot to pick him up? It was quiet in that daycare for a while, and then it was time for them to rise. They kicked out all the teachers, and then escaped into tunnels under the building. Hope was the last one to leave, but he lingered for a moment longer. The authorities hadn't arrived yet. There was no pushback, and all was still. He navigated the place through bathrooms that connected all the rooms together, since he wasn't able to go outside for fear of not getting back in. He walked through the old place, looking at all the old toys, decorations, and murals that were supposed to cause childhood wonder. The sun was setting as he reached the last room, and he looked through huge floor-to-ceiling windows as it dipped below the hills. Sirens rang out faintly in the distance, and he hurried down below ground. He rose through the official ranks quickly as well, through his own skill and speaking prowess. But the rebellion as a whole began to die down, until there was just a small troop of them left, being withered away through guerrilla warfare. The whole extent had lasted a few months, and they were all growing tired. Eventually, it was just Hope and this elite few that were escaping from their hideout to another place where they might find sanctuary. They rode across a small river on the invention of theirs that they called water skippers, that glided across the surface of the water. The authorities followed after them on boats, and guerrilla warfare them from the shores, picking a few of them off at a time until it was just Hope and his second-hand man. They were nearing their escape, a part of the river where the boat couldn't go, but it was a straight passageway, and one of them would have to go in front of the other. The second in command let Hope go first, as long as he lived, the movement was never be truly dead. But he succumbed to the firepower of the ship behind them, as Hope got away. The roads were slick enough then that Hope could hop on the puddles and move quickly through the open countryside. The moon dipped into night as he traveled this way, and then rose again, the sunlight casting golden rays through the elegant country. Hope found himself, without any more puddles, tearing up the bottom of his water skipper, and decided to get off in front of a burger restaurant in the middle of the extending nothingness. He went inside, where there was no one waiting for him. And with no idea what to do or where to go, he sat down at a booth and used the last bit of his once extensive funding to order a meal. And that was when I arrived to collect him. I could tell he learned a lot from his time at the daycare. Mainly, the nature of time and people.
I had once again returned to Easttown Mall, the floundering yet beautiful mall in a dying downtown district. I went to the poorer side of the mall first, the side with little decoration or fanfare, comprised mainly of thrift stores with the occasional pharmacy or something like that. I found in this side of the mall a furniture store selling elegant vintage furniture that looked to be in the Victorian style. I marveled at the store's lovely floor-to-ceiling windows and sat on an old couch, but found that it was better to look at than to engage in. The store was peaceful and a pleasant surprise. I always liked when new stores opened in my mall, but I was going straight for the theater and the mysterious Infinite Arcade. But my little theater was closed then, so I was forced to move on. I enjoyed walking through the elegant section of the mall, enjoying the elaborate designs and themes of the different sections. I went in a few of my favorite stores over there, but the Infinite Arcade was always the main attraction to me. On the third floor, I was aware of a newer arcade. This one had rides and interesting gimmicks to it, so I decided to visit it on my way out so I'd at least get to go by one arcade in my trip. The rides looked simplistic but fun, but there was no one around to operate them. And the prizes behind the counter were actually good, but there was no one to sell them. The entire arcade had a slight film of dust on it, but the foosball machine was operated automatically, so I played that once. I was looking through the small arcade when in between two cabinets something caught my eye. I looked in closer and it appeared that the two cabinets were set in front of a hallway. I squeezed in between and looked around. The hallway was empty and long, with a concrete floor and an unfinished feel. I began to walk down towards a door at the far end of the hallway. I wondered at what would lay behind the mysterious door at the end of this hidden hallway. I approached it, feeling a warmth from the other side and noticing cracks of golden light shining through the edges. I pressed against the door, feeling its warmth, and opened it to find the parking lot where I had come from. There was more to my mall and the Infinite Arcade than I had previously discovered. But that day, none of those questions would be answered, and I would leave with a simple but pleasant trip to the local mall. Innovation had recently taken a job at a local mid-tier grocery store. One day, with no customers and no work to be done, she began to eye the store's mobility scooters out of boredom. She began to work on it, tampering it to make it go faster and for longer. She finished upgrading it just as her shift ended, and she took the new cart out onto the roads. She drove on the empty highway to a local Asian place, where she quickly got sushi and returned to her cart. She took to the neighborhoods so she could avoid traffic and be more in the cart's intended environment. She got herself a little bit lost, but it wasn't much concern to her until she took a steep hill that pointed her towards the sky, where she was able to see a looming storm. The sky grayed the world overhead as she tried to find her way out of the neighborhood. Eventually, she thought to call Exploration to come pick her up. She pulled over in a big grassy field and waited for her brother. He came and got her as the first drops of rain began to fall, and as they drove off, the sky opened up overhead. One warm summer evening, Hope, Dementia, and Future gathered together at a local nature park as the sun cast golden rays through the sky and the shadows of the trees grew long in the cool grass. They blissfully played a football-esque game in the main field. Time passed quicker than they noticed, but eventually, when the sun was waning low and the lights were their last, Innovation and Hope realized they had to return, so they said their goodbyes and left. The whole thing felt weirdly final, like a last goodbye instead of a see you later. But they didn't know it was a last. To them, it was just a good memory, a warm sun, a fun day. That was all. Exploration got an interview at a local, small convenience store located in a big, dying strip mall. He came in late that evening and the manager greeted him. They sat in the weirdly placed dining table in the store, and the manager went over his brief interview before asking if he could take the night shift. Exploration agreed, and the boss left him there, all alone. Boredom was his main enemy. He walked up and down the aisles, ate some junk food, and swept here and there. But his list of things to do quickly ran out until he was just waiting for the sun. The sun did rise eventually, though, and a girl showed up to take over the store for him. They spoke only briefly as he left for the day. He returned for his next shift that night to find the store completely abandoned. He'd grabbed a little Deborah's cake and sat behind the counter and clocked in early.
The boss came in around that time and asked him what he was doing working before his shift was supposed to have started. He said that when he arrived, the store was empty, so he took initiative and took over the store from there. The boss seemed more sad than angry that the store had been abandoned, but he left Exploration there for the night, all the same. Exploration found a good audiobook on his phone and began to pass the hours, waiting for the sun to rise. On one of his walkthroughs through the store, he noticed a video game in a cover that he could play it through. It was some kind of Game Boy knockoff, but he played that for a few hours before getting bored. While he was bored in the store, he began to notice strange sounds and things darting out of the corner of his eye, but he never paid much attention to them. And eventually, the sun crested over the hills again, and the girl arrived to take his shift. This time they spoke more. And after getting to know him, the girl said that he should quit while he still could. She said the job was dangerous, and that he wouldn't last long if he stayed. It was then that the boss arrived, and Exploration decided to take her advice, only not wanting to throw her under the bus, naturally. He said that it was a conflict with school. The boss invited him into his back office, which he had never been in before. It was behind the store in the back rooms, and when he stepped in, it was weirdly big and all dark. While they were talking about his schooling and how his job would work, the boss got a phone call which he picked up. He said that it was his friend out back and that as a last act for the job, he should help him unload his box truck. Exploration and the boss went out back and began unloading the boxes from the old, worn-out box truck. The boxes were weirdly heavy and oddly shaped. Overall, Exploration had got the first truly bad feeling about the place then. But after the loading was done, he quit on the spot. Fade and I went to the church late one night for a small social gathering. The Time family was there, as well as other respected families of the establishment. As more of a social gathering, we mainly ate and spoke through the night. Fade and I stayed a little later than everyone else to help them tear down the party, and when we decided to leave, we had the church, seemingly, all to ourselves. We took our time walking through the grand halls, taking the long way through the building back to our car. On our way, we decided to take the elevator just for fun. And as we got in, I remembered when we had met in an elevator, though this one was far divorced from the ones we had met in, being nice, standard, with 80s wood paneling design. I think that Fade noticed it too. Suddenly, on our descent, the elevator jolted and then stopped. The lights flickered out, and we were stuck. We stayed there in the dark for a moment like any other person, but eventually took the easy way out and left the church through the mysterious ways of our own. Outside, the night air was cool and pleasurable, so we decided to make the journey home on foot.
found myself in need of a dry cleaning service. The place that came to the front of my mind when I thought about the task was located in a dying strip mall. I decided to go there since they were the closest, and why not? There was a front side of the strip mall with a few odd stores in it, and the dry cleaner was located off to the side, behind some other stores in a small little corner of the place where there was no other stores. I parked in the front and walked beside a long closed department store, and then down to the side where the other one was located. In the bottom section of the mall, I passed what was once an arcade many years ago, now completely unrecognizable from its former life. Down there I also passed a store where I could see that shelves were still up and items still on the shelves, though they were all very decrepit by then, as water damage had claimed the sanctity of the time capsule. The dry cleaners was not all the way at the end of the mall, though pretty far down, and surrounded by the empty stores. When I had reached it, I figured that it might be closed as well. I grabbed the handle, half expecting it to catch the lock inside the door, forcing me to find business elsewhere. But it gave easily, and a cheery bell sounded my entrance into this business. The first part of the place was an actual store, with faded 70s-looking beauty products around me. There were displays for old makeup and hair dye, all covered in a layer of dust. I figured that the dry cleaners would be in the back of the store, so I kept walking into another room. This room was dark, and coming from the outside, I could hardly make out its shape, although I could tell that there were aisles like a traditional store, but there was not a light on inside, so I kept going to the next room. This was the dry cleaners, and I handed the clothes I wanted fixed to the old Russian lady standing behind the counter, alone in the old store. I turned around and began my exit, pausing in the dark room. Now that my eyes had adjusted to the dark space, I could see that the shelves carried supplies for building and maintaining various things. This room, fitting oddly with the other two businesses in this small store, was something of a hardware store. Suddenly I had the idea that I was working on an old bike back home, and I needed an odd-sized inner tube for its tire. I began to look at the shelves and found the exact thing that I needed, in yellowed plastic packaging. I purchased it at what must have been its original 1970s or earlier price. I left the store with my treasure and vowed to come back, not only for my dry cleaning, but also the interesting little oddity in the skeleton of what once was. Attention Easttown Mall shoppers. The mall is now closed. We thank you for your years of loyal business. We don't know when we'll be open again or if we will come back, but we were glad to have gotten to serve you. So please make your way to the main entrance. I will be locking all the entrances, finishing off with that one.
If you go to the main entrance and find it locked, call the police, as I will be leaving my keys inside. I haven't seen anyone on the cameras, so I don't really know who I'm talking to. But if anyone out there is listening, God bless and good night.
One day, while I was with Rot, he had the idea to go to a local radio station and try out for a part that they had been advertising the casting for. Future was there at the time, so we decided to drag him along with us. I didn't have my car at the time, as Faye and the kids were using it to run errands. So we decided to add to the adventure by heading out on foot. We walked beside a long 2-lane highway. Rot brought a bike with him, which we mainly just had to push through the muck beside the highway. But it was a pleasant walk on a sunny day, with a nice crisp breeze bringing in the fresh fall air. We pushed the bike up a particular hill with a maple tree standing proudly on top, and we rested in its shade. We could see the radio station below us, in a run-down, flat-looking building. We all got on the bike and rode it down the hill towards the company. Once inside, we entered the struggling business that was surrounded on both sides by 2 closed businesses, one old deli and one thrift store. The entire place was straight out of the 70s. And the low light meant that nothing had faded in this perfect time capsule. We each tried out on the old brown equipment, giving our best lines, and we sat in the cool dark waiting room together, waiting on our results. It turned out that they had chosen Future, as they wanted a young voice to draw in new listeners. Rot was pretty mad, but I could see that he was happy for Future too. And we began the journey back, walking with our backs to the setting sun. One day I went to the Sun Sphere for Future's birthday party. The Time family had rented a whole floor of the Sun Sphere that I had never been to before, so I spent a good amount of the time at the party just walking around, looking at the space. It was primarily an arcade, sporting fancy rides and new games. There was even some classics, and of course, the best of all, skee-ball. I played a few games of skee-ball with my kids and Future before abandoning them to go explore the rest of the floor. In addition to the arcade, there was also a few restaurants. Up front, there was an American-style restaurant similar to a Shoney's or a Golden Corral. There was also a burger and pizza place, as would be expected for a venue for children's birthday parties. In the back of the place where there were fewer kids, I found another restaurant, a Mexican place set up like a bar. This section of the Sun Sphere had some
gymnastic playground equipment for the kids, though they weren't all that interested in it, so I had the place pretty much to myself. I ordered and got my food and ate at the bar, without seeing the worker who handed me my food again. When I was done eating, I looked around and realized how quiet it was. Even for that section of the sun sphere, it was a little bit too quiet. I walked back over to the original part casually to find no one there either. I walked around a few times for myself, and the place was completely deserted. I looked out the window to see the city still bustling around below. It was quite nice to be up there all by myself, but I couldn't shake a weird, eerie feeling, like something very bad had just happened. I didn't spend too long up there, as I went back down and left, though I found that I still couldn't shake the feeling. I went to the park one day. It was not a very nice day for walking. It was overcast, there was a slight chill in the air, and wind that brought with it the sprinklings of rain. But before that point, it had been raining constantly for days, and I was beginning to get cabin fever. So I ventured out on one of its walking trails in spite of the weather. As I walked, I saw the signs that the water had risen from the creek that the walking trail went beside. I could also see the water still raging in the creek below me. Receding from the flood it was, to something still violent and fearsome. The trail I was on was a gravel trail with plenty of puddles and mud from the floods, but I noticed in one particular spot weird imprints in the muck. They looked like some slithering thing with 100 legs trailing through. I had to stop for the muddy spot, but when I saw this peculiar thing, I got a weird feeling, a dangerous feeling. And so instead of trailing around the mud puddle and trapping myself further inside the woods, I turned around and began casually walking out. The weeds and trees swayed around me, congealing on and dispersing from my path. Some of the trees moved more wildly than others, more than the rest, and certainly more than the gentle breeze allowed. It was then that I started to run back to my car. I hit the open field of the park quick, and paused when I got to my car, out of a feeling of safety coming from not being in the woods. I looked back at the trees still swaying wildly. I heard a pop in the distance that immediately drew my attention. It sounded like a bone snapping somewhere far away. I was then brought back to my stretch of the woods when a particularly wild motion nearly carried a tree over. It exposed its roots towards the side of the woods, but instead of falling over completely, the roots seemed to come alive, scratching at the ground and bringing it back to its original side. The tree uprooted itself upright and began crawling towards me. I slipped in my car quickly and put it into high gear out of there. More trees and plants uprooted with the horrible sound as I began my escape. I had to dodge a few trees down the road. It seemed like the bigger and stronger trees were coming out, as well as the easier to escape weeds. The back roads were hard to manage, but I began to feel better when I reached the highway and there was no vegetation around.
I rushed back home as quickly as I could. I had been getting these weird feelings for days and days now, ever since the sun sphere, but now it was clear I had to do something about it. We had to escape. Something very bad had indeed happened, and these were only the shock waves. One day, Dementia and May were fishing out of a place called Clear Creek. It was a fine and beautiful day, one of the few that they had had that season. They split up, partially, May going farther down the creek than Dementia, so they wouldn't get in each other's way. The fish were biting that day. Dementia caught a beautiful shimmering rainbow trout, which she let back into the water. At one point, she decided to check her phone, but found that it wouldn't turn on. Leisurely, she made her way over to May, and they checked her phone to find that it was having the same problem. They both got a bad feeling, and they began to work their way out. They came across a wheat field that they decided to cross, and on the other side found a small portable house trailer. They were walking across the yard quietly, avoiding the junk piled up around the place. At one point, they had to crawl over an old lawnmower, but apparently they made too much noise in that endeavor, as while they were crossing, an old lady exploded out of the trailer wielding a shotgun. But she wasn't exactly mad, more confused about why the power had gone out. After the excitement had died down, they ended up talking, and the old lady was sympathetic to their plight. She gave them the keys to an old Camaro that they could use to get back into town. Dementia figured the battery would be dead, and it was, so they ended up using the lawnmower they were crawling over to jumpstart the battery. Other than that, the dusty old Camaro fired right up, and they sped into town. They left the forest and entered into society, which they found to be in ruins. There were abandoned cars all over the streets, and buildings were trashed. Some people were out looting, others were bandits on the highway, but eventually they made it back to the dorm safely. They had to run inside as there were people around who started chasing them as soon as they left the Camaro, which they weren't too worried about, as it had barely made it to the dorm on fumes. But the chase left them with no other option than to take the nearest door, which was leading into the inner side of her dorm. The first door available was to an arcade, which was now all dark and silent. They locked the door behind them and then began to independently secure the place, where they found that the old arcade was full of children. Dementia made May entertain them while she went to go check the rest of the place. They found it to be completely secure, and they settled in for the night, not knowing where they would go next. Right after the tree incident, my first stop was for Exploration, who was currently at a mall across town. It was a nice, newer mall, and he was looking in a trendy fashion store. He was in the back of the store looking for clothes all by himself, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw something strange in the window. The weather was rapidly taking a turn for the worse. It had been raining for several days, and on some level he knew that the sunshine was temporary, but the clouds were moving in quite fast, even for the strange weather patterns that had been occurring recently. And that's when he saw it. The funneling motion, the clouds drawing together and pulling down to form a massive tornado, heading straight for the mall once it gained that direction. With moments to act, he thought to duck inside of a safer cupboard, made completely out of wood, as the tornado began howling as it passed over. The building rattled to its core, and rubble fell all around his hiding spot, where it would have crushed him if he was out in the open. When it was all over, he crawled out into the mall, now destroyed, nothing but ruins, and he began to explore. The store he had been in had almost completely been destroyed, with the roof having been peeled away like a tin can, but the rest of the mall was fairly intact, though now completely silent. He justified this small exploration by offering that he was looking for survivors in need of help. And he did hear one muffled under the rubble. He pulled him out and moved on as that one ran away. And that's how I found him, wandering amongst the rubble of the mall. Truly he was my son, but I had no time to revel in the fact, as I still had to get the rest of my family before it was too late. Just before the time of distress, I had moved my family into a new house. On the day of the tree incident, Fade was out of the house too, as well as the kids, and so I had called over my good friend Rot to babysit Hope. He arrived on the rainy day after we had already left. This new house we were staying in was a quite run-down old ranch-style farmhouse. It had quite a few problems, one of which being the roof leaks. As soon as Rot walked in, he spotted a particularly aggressive one, and being a good friend, placed a bucket under it. He found Hope watching TV and sat down with him. They were watching a poorly made cartoon, where two characters would go on various adventures in a fantasy world. It was cheaply animated, but overall it was fun, and Hope seemed to enjoy it. So Rod sat there with him for an extended period of time, until they heard a noise coming from the basement. Rod had noticed that Hope had heard it too, and he asked him what it was. Hope said that it was the ghost. And, wanting for any kind of excitement, Rot urged them both down the stairs. The basement was illuminated by flickering incandescents, and the light showed off the extensive space. It was an unfinished basement with a cool concrete floor, and most interestingly, wooden stud walls that lined the place a few feet out from the cinder block wall at all spaces, and cut the room in half. The part of the room that was cut off by the makeshift wall was completely dark, giving that side of the room a feeling of extending infinitum. Hope took Rod over to an area under the stairs that was also lined with a stud wall, though this space was full of junk. There was another sound like the first one in a space unseen, under the stairs, and then she appeared, the ghost girl, partially transparent, and about Hope's general age. They played patty cake under the stairs before the ghost girl moved out of those confines to the space that went around the place, including the half of the room that was partitioned off. Out there they played a sort of chase game, each of them always on their own side of the walls. Rot sat down in a comfortable old neglected couch and judged the game. At one innocuous point, there was a horrific scream from deep inside of the unlit part of the basement. It was a terrible mix of anger and sorrow, longing and fear. The peaceful ghost girl immediately disappeared, and the two were left in the basement alone. Rot was now alert and instinctively pulled Hope back into the basement. For the second time, he asked him what the noise was, and this time he gave a much more terrifying answer. Hope said that it was the breakneck lady. Rot would soon find out who she was as she slowly emerged from the darkness on that side of the room. Unlike the peaceful ghost girl, she had a more physical form, consisting of bones that looked real. Her neck was long and broken in the middle, and she screamed and wailed as she emerged, each of her bones rattling with every motion she made. She went to each and every one of the walls, shaking the pillars with her full force, her bones rattling, and she continued to scream and wail. Eventually, she went back to her side of the room and just stood there staring at the two. Hope said that they should be safe as long as they were on their side of the stud wall. That was when the light flickered out. While the breakneck lady wasn't transparent like the pleasant girl, she was slightly luminous. As the light went out, Rot locked on to her light, and it slowly faded from the spot on that side of the wall and reappeared on their side. Rot quickly grabbed Hope and ran him up the stairs. They quickly dashed out onto the porch in the pouring rain. They huddled under the cover for the rest of their time there. Rot decided to go back in once to retrieve some ice cream from the refrigerator. He ran and got it quick, not lingering or looking into the old house. They ate it peacefully on the porch while they watched the rain out in the cool summer night air. On the day of the tree incident, Innovation was out having dinner with some of her friends. She was aware of the storm, which had already started when they entered the building, but it escalated as they ate. She could see out of a window behind her friends the rapidly progressing storm. At first it was soothing, something to watch while she talked and laughed with her buddies. But the lightning grew more fierce and the thunder grew louder and louder until the point when she became slightly concerned. Though not wanting to be outcast, she didn't raise these concerns to her friends until the storm grew so aggressive that it knocked the power out. With a flicker, the lights were gone and they were left in the dark. In the dark, a flash of lightning illuminated figures outside of the building, and she immediately knew that they were under some kind of attack. So she grabbed her best friend out of the group and drug her to the back of the restaurant. Faced with the choice between the bathroom and the kitchen, most might choose the bathroom as it would be more familiar, but she chose the kitchen and rushed her friend into the walk-in cooler. Once inside, they heard screaming from the outside. People in distress, a hearty commotion that hadn't been caused when the lights went out. Eventually, the noise died down and the lights came back on, and so they walked out to see what was left of the restaurant. And fitting with the sound, it was in complete ruin. All the windows busted out, rain pouring in, the storm still raging outside, and everything completely empty. All the crowds having vanished without a trace. That was when I arrived to pick her up and bring her somewhere safer. The storm was near universal that night, but I knew that the attacks of desolation had been targeted. What I didn't know yet was why. Ever since the tree incident, I knew that the world was no longer a safe place. Things were coming closer to collapsing than they had been in a long time, and I needed to get my family somewhere safe. Once I had them all gathered up, we took on winding road after winding road, running deeper and deeper into the country and further away from the chaos. The new day was bright and sunny, a deceptively calm day. Was it the eye of the storm, the calm before the storm? I didn't know. But I knew that it was only going to be temporary, and so I should enjoy the peace while it lasted. Along one road with farms on either side, we came across a small, run-down old building. It was a casual dining restaurant that I thought that I might stop at. Now at the time we were very low on money, but I figured it would be an important morale boost and something to hold on to once things really started to get crazy. I parked in the near empty parking lot and we all went into the cool, dark space. We had to wait a little while to be seated as there was only one worker running the place. She immediately took our order and dashed off to begin making our food, which naturally also took a very long time. I wasn't going to even think about rushing it though. I was enjoying the nice time with my family, sitting back in the comfortable chair and watching the mid-evening light filter in through the windows, lazily illuminating the place and igniting some stray specks of dust into brilliant golden flakes of light. Eventually our food did come out. It was nothing too special, but it was everything. And when we were done, we all wished for seconds. The waitress did not return though, so I pulled out the rest of our meager funds and placed it on the table, and we all piled in the car and began to go up the mountain. With trees hanging overhead, heading up sharp switchbacks on the old, unmaintained road, I could feel the question hanging in the air about where we were going. They would see soon enough, though. As we rounded a corner and approached a small, tar paper shack in the middle of the woods. For now and for the foreseeable future, this would be our home. Our refuge from the craziness. I thought back on my youthful visits to the House of Time, on the cold nights in the cabin we now resided in. I thought of the old, forgotten halls, and the playful wonder exuded from the house's forgotten secrets. Mysteries hid in the shadows, and every corner could go on forever. There was one space that always felt like my own,
a series of lofts in the guest room that I most commonly stayed in. There was one full of old antique toys and wonders for a child, but there was another one full of boring, everyday items that came to my mind when I recalled that time of my life. This loft went back further than the others, and with a bend. Though it was packed full of stuff, so hard to navigate, discouraging me from seeking its mysteries further. The one time I did crawl over breakable boxes, go under and over and around in every way possible to snake back to the bend. Once I got to the bend, there was less stuff for me to crawl around, and I was able to move freely in the small loft as it started to slope downwards and then broke out into stairs. As I moved on, there were less and less lights available. They were further spaced, and it got darker and darker, until I was in complete blackness walking down a series of steep steps. It never even occurred to my young mind to turn back when I reached the cool wooden door. I pressed against it and opened it, finding myself in a small, old house. On my left, there was a living room, and on my right, there was a dining room. I walked into the dining room, watching how the very early morning light drifted in through the dusty lace curtains. But it was in the kitchen that I saw him, my father Opulence, staring out of the window. He noticed me and looked at me and said, "You ought not to be here." Suddenly I was in the house again, and I became aware of how vulnerable I was. I ran to the door and up the stairs, and all the way back through the loft. Squeezing through was a little bit more difficult as an adult. Finally, I made it to the final door out of the lofts to find myself back in the cabin.